roadside memorials, ghost bikes. Cyclists and pedestrians know all too well of the dangers. So what's the solution? Can a look at the recent past make our streets safer in the future? This is Metro Week. Welcome to Metro Week. I'm Vanessa Barchfield, in for Andrea Kelly. A 3-year-old on a scooter, a man walking his bike across the road, cyclists out for a morning ride. Rarely a week passes in Tucson without news of a deadly car crash. The victims are our children, parents, siblings, friends. How common are traffic crashes? Let's look at the numbers. The shrine is for Alexandria Lara. The 25-year-old was pregnant when she and her boyfriend, Martin Verdugo, and 28-year-old Shayla Valerde were killed in a car crash at the intersection of 6th Street and Country Club last July. They were among the 91 people who lost their lives in traffic crashes in Pima County last year. That's according to the Arizona Department of Transportation's annual Crash Facts report, released last week. 895 people died in crashes on Arizona's roads in 2015, 121 more deaths than the year before. In Pima County, the number of traffic deaths has remained relatively steady for the past 5 years, as has the number of crashes. The report began including county data on pedestrian and bicycle deaths in 2013. Since then, the number of pedestrians killed in crashes has dropped slightly. A federal report in 2013 said the city of Tucson was among the worst for pedestrian deaths in U.S. cities with populations of more than 500,000. Last year, 5 bicyclists died in Pima County, the same number as 2013. Alcohol was involved in 40 of the traffic deaths last year. The report does not have county-level data on crashes that are caused by distracted driving, and doesn't track crashes caused by texting and driving. With stories of crashes so common, it's easy to forget the problem isn't about numbers, it's about lives. Brendan Lyons is a Tucsonan whose life was upended one morning in 2013.
It was a clear sunny day. It was, I think, an hour or two before noon, and went out with my girlfriend on the morning of her birthday to go ride and to train for El Tour de Tucson. This happened in October. El Tour was in November. The majority of our route consisted of riding along the river path up until that little area that we were riding up to Sabino Canyon. And I mean, to be honest, that's all I really remember.
911, how can I help you?
The bicyclist was just hit by a car. There's two bicyclists down, or cyclists down.
911, where's your emergency?
Yes, I'd like to report a bicyclist being hit.
911, where's your emergency?
It's a vehicle accident. It's a bicyclist and a car. The cyclist is conscious, but definitely on the ground.
I do know that a distracted motorist at 45 miles an hour struck us from behind as we were in the bike lane.
911.
My car just swerved and I accidentally hit 2 bikers.
Okay, is somebody injured?
Yes, 1, maybe 2, I'm not sure. 2 injured.
Woke up a few days later in a hospital bed. I sustained 6 fractured vertebrae and a fractured pelvis on both sides, and took me away from my dream career as a firefighter. All too often we feel that it's not going to happen to me, but the truth is, it doesn't happen to you until it happens to you. It took 2 years, 7 months, and 2 days before I even met the man who almost took my life. And I saw him at a function that I was speaking at, and I immediately approached him. And I said his name, and he looked at me. I introduced myself, and he looked at me as if he had seen a ghost. And he extended his arm to shake my hand, and I dismissed it to give him a hug. And it was at that moment that I told him the first words out of my mouth were, "I forgive you." All too often we hear the stories of the victims that are left behind to pick up the pieces. But what this did to him, and he basically said that he was mentally paralyzed for weeks on end, and knowing that the damage that he had done to somebody else, and that he had almost killed somebody. The guilt-stricken motorist that has to, I mean, there's also recovery for them to have closure and to know that, to speak out and let the community know how they feel. And I often reflect upon how lucky I am and fortunate to be here, but it's not fair when you talk to these families who have lost loved ones. And I mean, there's no words that you can say that will bring them back. And you just hope that by encouraging our community and those around us to pay attention. I mean, this is completely avoidable. And it's heartbreaking when I hear these stories.
Arizona is one of 2 states without a ban on texting while driving. Earlier this week, I spoke to State Senator Steve Farley, who's been trying for years to change that.
I was actually the first legislator in the country to propose a ban on driving while texting. And at the time, obviously, no one else had a ban. Now, 10 years later, we're one of only 2 states that does not have such a ban. The problem has been boiled down to one person, Senator Andy Biggs, who's now Senate President. When I first came into the House, he was the chair of the Transportation Committee in the House. Then he was the chair of the Transportation Committee in the Senate, and now he's Senate President. And in those positions, he could single-handedly kill the bill through not assigning it to a committee or assigning it to 4 committees, or threatening people who wanted to vote for it who were on his side, or using various different ways of cutting it down. So it's only come down to one person.
I believe that Senator Biggs and other opponents have said that there are other laws on the books already that allow police to cite drivers for texting while driving. What's your response to that?
Well, he said that, and there are some other laws that can be enforced. In fact, I encouraged the Director of Public Safety to use the speeding law to pull over people for distracted driving, which is a great idea, because what speed, if the law says that you can't drive at a speed that's neither reasonable nor prudent, what speed is reasonable or prudent to drive at while you're texting? That's 0. So they've been citing people since I suggested that for the last 3 years. But you need a specific law targeting texting for a lot of different reasons. Number one, you need to make it clear to new drivers or even experienced type A personalities who can't keep off that cell phone that this is not a legal thing to do, and you will be busted. You've got to spell it out specifically, because it's become a very serious problem in which hundreds of people are injured and killed every year here in Arizona.
And what do you hear from your constituents as the years go by?
I hear mostly they're confused as to why we don't have a law yet, because it seems pretty straightforward to them. It's not a partisan thing. 83% to 92% of Arizonans, depending which poll you read, agree that we need to have a law banning driving while texting. You can't find 90% of Arizonans agree on anything, whether it's mom, apple pie, baseball, but they agree that this is a dangerous practice that should be banned. So most constituents are pretty outraged that our roads are not being made safer because one person has been getting in the way of having a law.
So you're saying you will introduce the bill again next year?
I absolutely will introduce this bill. I'll introduce another bill that actually I brainstormed with Senator Biggs about, which would increase the punishment if you injure or kill someone with a car if you are using your cell phone at the time. That really gets at the heart of getting people to think about whether or not they should do it in the first place. Because no one sets out to become a murderer when you get in your car and fire up your cell phone. But in effect, you are leaving yourself open to being a murderer if you do that. If you know that you're going to do serious jail time if you text and drive, you might decide not to do it in the first place.
Texting and driving is, of course, just one sort of element of distracted driving.
Yeah.
Are there other behaviors that you think need to be regulated as well?
Well, I should make clear that texting while driving is shorthand for using your portable electronic device to read or write a written or visual message. That covers pretty much everything. For example, in Yuma, the highway patrolman, Officer Tim Huffman, was killed by a truck driver who was on Facebook. Any type of distraction that takes your attention away from the road is dangerous. It's part of why I like that the DPS is now pulling people over for other types of distractions. I've done ride-alongs with them since I suggested they use the speeding law to cite people. And I remember the night I did the ride-along that we actually pulled over a truck driver who had a tablecloth spread out over his steering wheel and was eating his dinner while heading on down the highway with his load at 75 miles an hour. That was a problem. It's a lot of problems when we're in our car and we've gotten all too used to being in that space and also used to always being in touch with, always entertaining ourselves, that somehow we forget that we're piloting this incredibly large and dangerous and fast hunk of metal down our highway, which can be a danger to ourselves and others.
Streets are the most abundant of public spaces. The Living Streets Alliance of Tucson has a goal to make our streets vibrant spaces that bring the community together. But first, roads need to be safe. We asked Director Emily Yetman why crashes remain such a problem.
Well, for one thing, I think we can shift our thinking about these sorts of incidents that we're having. I mean, right now we call them accidents, and in most cases they're not. We don't call a plane coming out of the sky a plane accident. We call it a plane crash. And the whole idea with that is that crashes are preventable. You know, we're humans, we all make mistakes in our days, and there's human error, but we can start to plan for that and even build our roads and our streets to make them safe, and so that we can predict those sorts of things and engineer them out so that they don't happen.
And what are some positive changes that you see taking place around the region?
Well, for one thing, I think that the city of Tucson has done a great job at looking how to make crossing of roadways really safe for people on foot and on bikes. So right behind me, you can see there's a toucan. That's something that was invented here in Tucson, and it's something that can be installed to make it easier for people to get across the street if they're biking or walking. So for example, right here, we know that there's the University of Arizona, and there's a lot of people trying to move over to 4th Avenue, and that this was a needed crossing. So they looked at how they could make it safe for people to do that. And then one of the other things that ties into that is that the city's looking at something called a Bicycle Boulevard Master Plan, which really looks at how to turn neighborhood streets into really safe and comfortable routes for people on foot and our bikes, so that they're not stuck having to ride on a street like Speedway where this traffic's really fast and there's a lot of it, and it could feel really uncomfortable for someone like me, especially if I've got my kid on back. So by creating this alternate network, they're giving people more options and safer options and helping them have safe connections wherever they need to go. So I'd say the city's doing a great job with that so far.
And many major cities around the U.S. have adopted Vision Zero plans with the goal of entirely eliminating traffic deaths. What are the main tenets of that plan, and is it time for Tucson to adopt one?
I think it's definitely time. We've seen crashes here with bicyclists and pedestrians on the rise over the years, and we need to treat this like it's a public health epidemic. I mean, this is a public safety, public health epidemic, and Vision Zero does exactly that. It looks at how we can turn policy into action. So adopting things like Complete Streets policy, which would ensure that on a street right here on Euclid, for example, there's always a sidewalk and a facility for bicyclists so that they can always be safe and protected. Vision Zero also does a really good job of setting goals and saying even one fatality is too many, because we're all people, we all need to get around, and we deserve to be able to do that safely.
And how are Tucsonans' attitudes towards mobility changing?
It's important to remember that we all walk, right, in some way or form, and so we're all in a position at some point where we do need to get across this road, or we can relate to our parent or a kid needing to get to school safely. And so I think the more that we can identify as people that we see out in the streets, the better. And as drivers, I think it's helpful to be in that mindset too. I mean, I know that when I'm driving, I'm constantly terrified that I'm going to hit someone, because when you get going fast, it's hard to maintain control. There's a lot of distractions. So I think that Vision Zero and Complete Streets are ways of moving our transportation system towards a model that makes the onus less on individuals and actually builds safety into our transportation system.
What's the Living Streets Alliance's vision for how mobility in Tucson should look like?
Well, our philosophy or our way of looking at that is streets are public space, right? We all pay for them. They're kind of the most abundant form of public space that we have here in Tucson. And in great cities, they function as public space. So they're great places that facilitate interaction. They can really boost sales for the local economy. They create safer streets because people are out and they do self-policing. So we really try and are trying to gear our streets to be more as public space so that we can have those added benefits.
Tucson's, of course, a geographically sprawling region subject to extreme temperatures. Is it possible to reduce our reliance on private transport?
I absolutely think so, but it requires a lot of public investment and obviously the will of the people to do that. And a big part of that is making sure that our transit and our walking facilities and our biking facilities are all really well integrated. And same with traffic too, with automobiles, so that you can park one place, hop on transit, go down, walk around, get back on and come back, and you're not stuck in the sun like we are right now, for example. So shade's really important, but also linking all those systems is critical.
And how much of this change would you say is policy driven versus a change in attitudes that's necessary?
That's a chicken and egg question, but I think policy is really important, and I don't know that we have the policies in place right now. We don't have goals. We've never said one death is one too many. And I think that's a really strong statement that we've seen other cities make and that we could say and do here in Tucson, and then put the policies in place to reach that goal. Without policies, there's no benchmarks, there's no baseline for tracking our improvements or knowing if we're meeting our goals. So I think the policy piece is really important.
Is there a city that Tucson can use as a model?
Well, I think it's really easy to point to big cities like New York City, where they've made huge improvements in improving pedestrian and bicyclist safety. They've done that by lowering speeds. We know for a fact that if you are hit by a car going 20 miles an hour, you are about 90 times more likely to survive that, whereas only 1 in 10 people will survive when they get hit when a car is going 40. So that makes a big difference. Changing traffic speeds can really save lives, and so New York City has made that a priority, and they've focused that around school zones especially, so that kids trying to get to school are going to be safe. And then they've really pushed the policy piece so that there's accountability, so that their elected officials are really pushing for improvements to be made, and messaging and kind of the full package of trying to change behaviors. But speeding makes a big difference.
Are there any practical changes in behavior that bicyclists should be taking to stay safer?
Well, I think, for starters, it can be really confusing to drivers if bicyclists are doing things that are unpredictable. It's the same way it's confusing for bicyclists if people in cars are doing things that are unpredictable. So the more we can all follow the traffic laws is really, will make a difference so that everyone can predict what everyone else is doing. That's really important.
Can you point out just a few changes that motorists should be taking to keep everyone on the road safer?
Nobody likes to be told what to do, but I can't tell you enough how much of a difference it would make if people would just slow down. I mean, really, slowing down 5 miles an hour can make all the difference in saving someone's life. And we all get busy, we all get distracted, we go, we've got kids to get to school or, appointments to make, but is it worth taking someone's life? And do you really want that burden? I know I don't want that burden as a driver. So something to keep in mind and to just think about, especially this time of year, when you see someone out waiting to cross the street, they're hot and they're anxious to get to shade, so be courteous if you can.
Coming up later, here on PBS 6. The wildfire season is upon us, and you know the damage that can be done. On the next Arizona Week, we'll look at preparations underway, aimed at protecting southern Arizona and keeping the firefight off our doorstep. That's on Arizona Week, coming up later, here on PBS 6.
Now our Journalist Roundtable. Joining me in the studio are Michelle Marisco of KJZZ Radio in Phoenix, Murphy Woodhouse of the Arizona Daily Star, and my colleague at Arizona Public Media, Nancy Montoya. Thank you all for being here. Murphy, you reported earlier this week that the county is redesigning an intersection at Sunrise and Skyline. That's, of course, the intersection where one cyclist was hit and killed earlier this year. What's going on at that intersection? Why is it so dangerous?
Well, the basic design is this. Skyline merges with Sunrise through what's called a free flow intersection, or a free flow lane. It doesn't come to a normal T intersection. That free flow lane then takes motorists merging onto Sunrise from Skyline across the westbound bicycle lane. And it was there that in January, as you mentioned, another out-of-state cyclist to be killed this year was struck and killed. And that tragedy, brought the issue to the attention of the county and the cycling community. I'm also a cyclist. That's an intersection that I know well, and I haven't had the close calls that other people have had, but certainly when I'm near there, I'm a little bit more on edge than I am at other intersections in town. So certainly one that a lot of the cycling community knows well, and not always for the best of reasons. And so what are some options being thrown out, some solutions? Yeah, so the county saw this happen. The county proposed a redesign. Some elements of that redesign got a lot of criticism from the cycling community, both the bicycling advisory committee that advises both the city and the county, as well as the Cactus Cycling Club, about 200-member club that rides there regularly. One part of the solution proposed by the county was to include speed tables to slow down traffic as they merge with Sunrise. This was received well by the cycling community. However, the proposal to remove the yield signs for motorists merging and to actually put one in specifically for cyclists, this was not received nearly as well as for changes to the dedicated westbound bike lane on Sunrise. And to the county's credit, when these proposals received criticism, the county heard that criticism and has since modified both the short-term and long-term solutions. And now it seems that they are in fact considering either severely constricting that free flow lane, or perhaps even turning that into just a regular T intersection, requiring cars to come to a complete stop before turning onto Sunrise.
I was wondering, Murphy, what's the relationship between the cycling community and our government officials? I've just purchased a bike, and I'm going to start riding to work the 2 miles. And is it a safe overall place to ride a bike?
Well, so I will certainly qualify my response saying I'm very new to covering the county and its interaction with the cycling community, but it seems that in this case there was quite close collaboration, and on the county's part, certainly a sincere consideration of criticisms raised by both the official advisory body and just a regular local cycling club, and there are many of those. And then I guess to your question about what it's like being a cyclist in Tucson, I am a cyclist. I'm both a commuter and a recreational cyclist. I, for the most part, find Tucson to be a quite safe place, with some fairly serious exceptions. This intersection being one of them. A handful of others, but on the whole, I feel fairly safe most places as a cyclist.
Good news.
Yeah.
Now I want to move on to another topic. Michelle, you've been covering the latest wave of migrants from Central America into the U.S. How is this migration wave different to the one we saw 2 years ago?
Well, I'm not sure if it is yet. That's why we're covering it, is because the numbers of people coming up from Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador right now are mirroring a lot of the same statistics that we saw in 2014, and especially in April and March of this year. The question is going to be as the summer heats up and as we get into June and July, because that's when it peaked in 2014. After that year, the United States has been a lot more prepared for that type of influx. We spent nearly $1 billion on about 100 detention facilities throughout the country. CBP's asked for millions millions of dollars more. Homeland Security at large and Health and Human Services have also asked. Now, the question is, the curiosity that I'm seeing this year is all of the different nationalities that we're seeing along the border. For example, we've had 27,000 Cubans who have been coming through Texas. Many of those people, after a year here, can actually have residency. We have Central Americans asking for asylum. Yuma, which was a story I reported on earlier this week, is normally very quiet. In 2014, they had something like 200 families that came through. This year, they've had 1,700. San Diego sector, that's another interesting one. 2 years ago, they had 8 Chinese nationals. This year, they've had nearly 700. So there's a lot of different facets of people from all along the globe. I mean, when I'm in Yuma, one of the current influxes is Romanians. Romania is actually economically a fairly healthy country. So I don't know what's driving that, but regardless, we're having immigrants from Romania crossing through Yuma, Arizona at the moment.
And you reported also, of course, that Mexico has been setting up checkpoints in order to reduce the number of migrants that actually make it to the U.S. border. And yet still, it seems that many migrants are evading those checkpoints. What's going on? Are they just ineffective?
It's tough to say. I mean, Mexico with its law enforcement has always been somewhat of a dicey situation. Sometimes it's an incredibly effective organization like the Mexican Marines. Other times, especially when it comes to immigration, it's not as effective. So I think a year ago in 2015, when we actually saw our numbers, our apprehensions here in the U.S. drop, but then Mexico's picked up, it seems like it was extremely effective. This year, it doesn't seem to be. My reporter, I sent him down to Tapachula and to Arriaga in southern Mexico, and he reported that while there was an extreme presence of law enforcement, of Mexican immigration agents being trained by the Border Patrol, he also saw a lot of migrants from those Central American countries.
I'm wondering about the cost of all of this. You know, what is the United States investing into Mexico in order to stop migrants at the Mexican border? Any idea on how costly it is for the U.S.?
A lot of that comes through the Merida Initiative.
Right.
This is the Trans-Border Security Agreement that was made in, I believe, 2007. They've cut loose about $20 million of $100 million that were allocated specifically for Mexico's National Migration Institute. That was essentially turning a lot of Mexican immigration agents into proxy U.S. Border Patrol agents. So we are spending a serious amount of money in that area. We'll see whether or not it's effective as the summer progresses.
And I also wanted to talk to you, Nancy, about the cost of actually detaining migrants. You mentioned that the U.S. has been building detention facilities. How much does it cost to detain people? And what are the facilities like?
A lot. Almost $2 billion a year. And at any one point in time, ICE has around 35,000 migrants in detention. We're looking at about $5 million a day. There is a big movement by the United Nations High Command to transfer the whole idea of detaining migrants to more community-based alternatives. And the cost in savings is unbelievable. Right now, it costs around $160 per person per day to keep a migrant in a facility. But if you transfer that same person into a nonprofit organization to coordinate that person, it would be around $20 a day. So we're seeing a huge savings. And also one of the big reasons that many, especially from Central America, are being deported is because they're not making their hearing dates. They go off and they don't make their hearing dates, so they're deemed undesirable and are put on a list for deportation. But the statistics have shown that when these people are under the care of nonprofits, 97% of them make their court dates. And so in addition to being more humane, in addition to saving money, many in the human rights world are saying it's the right thing to do. America detains more people than any other country in the world. And Arizona is one of the highest in the country.
Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you for watching. Andrea Kelly will be back next week.